I found out my idea had been stolen during a company-wide Zoom call. There it was, my proprietary algorithm, the one I'd spent 18 months developing in my spare time, being presented as the future of Horizon Innovations by my manager, David Miller. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Alex Chen, 34 years old, senior software engineer, and I watched in stunned silence as David clicked through slides detailing my work while the CEO praised his innovative thinking. The chat box filled with congratulations. Someone wrote David for CTO. I remained silent, my profile picture staring back at the 53 people in the meeting, my microphone muted, my hands shaking. 2 days earlier, David had asked to brainstorm privately about the upcoming quarterly review. Just want to see what you're working on, Alex. Maybe we can polish it together before presenting to leadership. I'd walked him through my predictive analytics model, a system that could forecast customer purchasing behavior with 87% accuracy, drastically reducing inventory costs. The potential revenue impact, $23 million annually, conservatively. I'd been refining this on nights and weekends for a year and a half, documenting everything, preparing to present it myself. I even had the email trail proving it was mine. When the Zoom call ended, I closed my laptop, walked to my kitchen, and poured a glass of water. I didn't slam things, didn't scream, didn't immediately fire off an accusatory email. That's not how I operate. Instead, I sat down at my dining table and began making a list, document original development timeline, gather all related emails, review company IP policy, consult with an attorney, schedule meeting with HR. The betrayal stung, but rage would solve nothing. Strategy would. I met David 3 years ago when I joined Horizon Innovations in Seattle. His LinkedIn profile called him a visionary technology leader, but in reality, he was more politician than engineer. Someone who hadn't written a line of code in years but knew how to take credit for others' work. I should have recognized the warning signs, the way he'd hover around successful projects, insert himself into email threads at the last minute, schedule unnecessary check-ins that seemed designed only to gather intelligence on what his team was building. "I'm your biggest advocate," he'd tell us during team meetings. "My job is to make sure your brilliant work gets the recognition it deserves." What he meant was that our brilliant work would get recognition through him. The company had a history of fast-tracking managers who delivered big wins, and David had his eyes on the C-suite. He just needed someone else's innovation to get him there. I'd seen him do this before, with Jessica Wong's cloud storage solution last year, which David presented as a collaborative effort despite having contributed nothing, with Raj Patel's security protocol, which mysteriously became the team's approach spearheaded by David. But those had been work-for-hire projects developed during company time. My algorithm was different. I'd built it during personal hours, documented everything meticulously, and had been careful not to use company resources. Under Horizon's own IP policy, this was my intellectual property. I just planned to give the company first rights to license it. The week after David's presentation, he was suddenly everywhere, giving interviews to tech blogs, leading special meetings with the board, mentioning his breakthrough algorithm at every opportunity. Meanwhile, I was assigned to support the implementation team for the project, essentially demoted to maintaining my own creation while David took victory laps. The company stock jumped 4% after a press release about the innovation. David received a special commendation from the CEO, Michael Thompson. An email went out about David's bold, creative leadership. I said nothing publicly. Instead, I began executing my plan. First, I reviewed every document, every file, every commit associated with the algorithm. I had personal cloud backups showing development milestones dating back 18 months. I had notes from the original concept. I even had a provisional patent application I'd filed 6 months earlier. I compiled everything chronologically in a secure folder. Next, I scheduled a consultation with Patricia Lin, an attorney specializing in intellectual property. We met at a coffee shop in Pike Place Market, away from corporate eyes. I laid out the situation, showed her my documentation. "This is actually quite solid," she said, reviewing my files. "Your timeline is clear, the documentation is thorough, and you've been smart about keeping development off company resources." She looked up from her laptop. "What do you want from this, Alex? A lawsuit? Recognition? Compensation?" "I want what's fair," I replied, "and I want consequences for theft." She nodded. "Then we'll start with a formal letter establishing your claim, but not send it yet. First, you should speak with HR. See if this can be resolved internally. Companies hate IP disputes going public. Document everything from here forward, every conversation, every email." I followed her advice, scheduling a meeting with Rachel Garcia from Human Resources. Rachel had been with Horizon for 12 years and had a reputation for fairness. I prepared carefully, bringing only the most essential documentation to establish my case without overwhelming her. "I appreciate you bringing this to me first," Rachel said, after I'd presented the evidence. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I noticed her taking detailed notes. "I'll need to review everything thoroughly and speak with legal. This is obviously a sensitive situation involving a senior manager." "I understand," I said. "I'm not looking to create problems. I just want proper attribution and fair treatment under the company's own policies." Rachel nodded. "We have a process. For this, I'll begin a formal review immediately and circle back within 5 business days. In the meantime, I'd appreciate your discretion." I agreed, but I'd also prepared for institutional stonewalling. That evening, I emailed Patricia with an update, then continued gathering evidence. I'd been monitoring the company chat system, where David had been discussing his algorithm with the implementation team. In one thread, a new engineer had asked about the underlying methodology, and David had responded with text lifted directly from my development notes, documents I'd shared with him during our brainstorming session. I captured screenshots, adding them to my file. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 days later, Rachel requested another meeting. Her demeanor had changed, more formal, less open. "Alex, I've consulted with our legal team, and they've reviewed your materials. The situation isn't as clear-cut as it might seem. The algorithm was developed while you were employed here, and our contracts include fairly broad language about intellectual property." "I've reviewed that language carefully," I replied calmly. "The policy explicitly exempts work done on personal time without company resources, provided it doesn't directly relate to assigned duties. My job description has never included predictive purchasing algorithms. I was hired to maintain our database architecture." Rachel shifted in her seat. "David has provided documentation showing collaborative development. He claims the core concept emerged during team brainstorming sessions last year." I'd anticipated this. I have the original GitHub repository with commits dating back 18 months. David has never made a single contribution. I also have the initial concept notes time-stamped before any brainstorming session he's referring to. And I have recorded video of my own development environment showing progressive builds of the algorithm with features that weren't even discussed in any company meeting. Something flickered across Rachel's face. Recognition that this wasn't going to be easily dismissed. "I'll need copies of everything you just mentioned, i.e." "Of course," I said. "I'll provide those immediately, but I want to be clear about something, Rachel. I'm following proper channels out of respect for the company, but my attorney is prepared to move forward if necessary. I'd prefer an internal resolution." After our meeting, I forwarded the additional documentation as promised. Then I waited, continuing my day-to-day work as if nothing was wrong. David, meanwhile, had been avoiding direct contact with me, communicating only through group emails or via other team members. In meetings, he spoke about implementation timelines and scaling challenges as if he intimately understood the algorithm's architecture. Though anyone with technical knowledge could see, he was struggling with basic questions. A week passed with no response from HR. Then 2 weeks. I sent a polite follow-up email to Rachel, just checking on the status of our discussion. Her reply was bureaucratic. "The review is ongoing. These matters require thorough examination." I recognized the holding pattern, a common corporate tactic. Wait long enough and people often give up. But I wasn't going to give up. I'd prepared for this phase too. During those quiet weeks, I'd been combing through old email threads, looking for a specific pattern. David had a habit of forwarding emails to himself, often accidentally including others in the chain. I found what I needed in a forgotten thread. From 3 months earlier, David discussing my work with another manager. "Chen's been developing something big on his own time. Need to get eyes on it before he presents independently. Could be the breakthrough I need for the CTO track." That email wasn't just evidence of intent. It was the smoking gun. But I didn't deploy it immediately. First, I sent a formal letter, drafted by Patricia to both Rachel and the company's legal department, outlining my claim and the supporting evidence. The letter was professional but firm, establishing a paper trail and signaling that I was serious. The response came quickly this time. A meeting request from Michael Thompson, the CEO himself. Rachel would attend, along with the chief legal officer. David would not be present. I prepared meticulously for this meeting, reviewing all my documentation, rehearsing key points with Patricia. I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed professionally but not defensively, projecting calm confidence rather than wounded anger. Michael Thompson was known for his directness. He didn't disappoint. "Alex, I've reviewed the materials you provided. To HR, concerning situation, to say the least. I'd like to hear your perspective directly." I laid out the facts chronologically, my independent development of the algorithm, the documented timeline, David's sudden interest, and the subsequent presentation where my work was claimed as his. I didn't editorialize or attack David's character. I stuck to verifiable facts and documentation. The chief legal officer, Eleanor Winters, asked pointed questions about development resources, timestamps, and documentation methods. I answered each one precisely, occasionally referencing specific exhibits from my documentation package. "And what resolution are you seeking?" Michael finally asked. "3 things," I replied. "First, proper attribution for the intellectual and property. Second, appropriate compensation for its value to the company, as would be standard for any licensed innovation. Third, assurance that this type of situation won't happen to other team members in the future." Michael nodded slowly. "I appreciate the professionalism you've shown throughout this process, Alex. Many would have handled this quite differently." He glanced at Eleanor, who gave a slight nod. "We'll need 48 hours to complete our review and determine next steps. Can I ask for your continued discretion during that time?" I agreed, though I left the meeting uncertain about the outcome. Corporate dynamics often favor management over individual contributors, regardless of the evidence. I'd seen promising careers derailed over less, but I'd presented my case as strongly as possible, and now the decision was in their hands. That evening, my phone lit up with a text from Jessica Wong, a colleague who'd faced similar treatment, from David in the past. "You in trouble. Saw you meeting with Thompson and legal today." I was cautious in my response. Just clearing up a misunderstanding. Nothing to worry about. Is it about the algorithm? Everyone knows David couldn't have built that. The technical details are way beyond him. I appreciated the support, but maintained my professional stance. Can't really discuss it right now, Jess, but thanks. The next day passed in strange normalcy. I attended my usual meetings, worked on current projects, exchanged pleasantries with colleagues who had no idea about the background drama. David was conspicuously absent, his calendar showing off-site meetings all day. At 4:30 p.m., I received an email from Michael's assistant. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m., CEO conference room. No agenda, no additional context. I forwarded it to Patricia, with a brief note. Preparing for any outcome. That night I couldn't sleep. I reviewed my documentation one last time, considered potential scenarios, and prepared responses for each. By morning I felt clear-headed and resolved. Whatever happened, I had stood up for myself and for the principle that innovation should be properly attributed and rewarded. The CEO's conference room was designed to impress. Wall-to-wall windows, overlooking Puget Sound, a massive table of polished walnut, screens displaying real-time company metrics. When I arrived, Michael was already seated, along with Eleanor and Rachel. There was a fourth person I didn't recognize, a woman in a crisp suit who was introduced as Victoria Zhao, head of the company's innovation division. "Thank you for coming, Alex," Michael began, his tone serious but not unfriendly. "We've completed our review of the situation regarding the predictive analytics algorithm." He looked down at a folder in front of him. "Based on the extensive documentation you've provided, along with internal communications we've accessed, we've determined that the intellectual property in question was indeed developed independently by you, outside of company time and resources." I maintained a calm exterior, though internally I felt a wave of validation. "Furthermore," Michael continued, "we've established that there was a deliberate attempt to misattribute this innovation." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "David Miller is no longer with Horizon Innovations, effective immediately." The statement hung in the air for a moment. I hadn't expected such a definitive action so quickly. Eleanor spoke next. "We've prepared a formal acknowledgement of your intellectual property rights, along with a proposed licensing agreement that we believe fairly compensates you for the value this innovation brings to the company. Victoria's team has assessed the potential impact, and we're prepared to offer both an upfront payment and ongoing royalties based on implemented cost savings." Victoria slid a document across the table. "We're proposing a $15 million immediate compensation, followed by a 2% royalty on verified savings for 5 years. Based on our projections, that could exceed $8 million total compensation." The BA figure was substantial, far more than I'd anticipated, but this wasn't just about money. "There's one more thing," I said. "I mentioned 3 requirements for resolution: proper attribution, fair compensation, and assurance that this won't happen to others." Michael nodded. "We're implementing a new innovation attribution protocol across the company, with clear documentation requirements and multiple verification points. No presentation of new intellectual property will proceed without a transparent development history. We're also revising our management evaluation criteria to emphasize fostering team innovation rather than merely producing it." Why, he leaned forward slightly. "Alex, we failed you as an organization by allowing this situation to develop. That's on us, and we're taking steps to fix it. But I want you to know that your approach to this situation, methodical, evidence-based, and professional, made it possible for us to address it properly. Not everyone would have handled it this way." I considered his words carefully. "I appreciate the comprehensive response. I'd like my attorney to review the licensing agreement, but conceptually, this addresses my concerns." After the meeting, I walked to a nearby park and sat alone, processing everything. David was gone. My work was recognized. The compensation was significant. Yet I felt strangely hollow, not from disappointment, but from the realization that vindication doesn't always feel how you expect it to. Jessica texted me that afternoon. "Holy shit! David just got escorted out. What did you do?" I replied, "Simply told the truth, with evidence." The company announcement came the next day. Horizon Innovations is proud to announce a breakthrough predictive analytics platform developed by senior engineer Alex Chen. This proprietary technology, now being implemented across our operations, represents the kind of innovative thinking that drives our company forward. There was a separate, smaller note about leadership changes and David's departure to pursue other opportunities. In the weeks that followed, I worked closely with Victoria's team to implement the algorithm properly. My licensing agreement was finalized, with terms even more favorable than initially proposed. Colleagues who had once congratulated David now approached me with knowing looks or quiet acknowledgements. Some asked directly what had happened. I kept my responses professional and brief. 3 months later, I made a decision that surprised even me. With my financial compensation secured and my professional reputation enhanced, I submitted my resignation. Despite the company's corrective actions, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was time for something new. The environment held too many reminders of the betrayal, too many awkward interactions with people who had enthusiastically praised David for stealing my work. I moved to Portland and founded a small consultancy focusing on predictive analytics for retail operations. Within a year, I had 6 employees and clients across the Pacific Northwest. I occasionally heard updates about Horizon, their successful implementation of my algorithm, which continued to generate royalty payments. Their new attribution protocols, Michael's public commitments to fostering innovation culture. Last week, I received an email from Rachel Garcia. "Thought you might want to know that your case study is now part of our management training. Anonymous, of course, but the lessons are clear. Hope you're doing well in Portland." I appreciated the update, but felt no need to respond. That chapter was closed. Jessica visited Portland last month and we met for coffee. "You know what's crazy?" she said. "David somehow landed a director position at TechServe, still claiming to be the innovation guru who developed that algorithm at Horizon." I shrugged. "Some people never change. Aren't you angry? He's still benefiting from your work." I considered the question seriously. Not really. The people who matter know the truth. I've got the documentation, the recognition, and the compensation. His house of cards will collapse eventually. People like that can't help overreaching. And truly, I wasn't angry anymore. The email thread I'd forwarded to the CEO had changed everything. Not just my career path or financial situation, but my understanding of professional integrity. I'd learned that principles matter, documentation matters, and the right approach to confronting injustice matters. Yesterday, I received a message from a former colleague still at Horizon. "You see the news about David?" Attached was a link to a tech industry blog. David had been removed from his position at TechServe following allegations of plagiarism and misrepresentation. The article mentioned a pattern of claiming credit for others' innovations and documentation undermining claims of original development. I closed the article without finishing it. There was no satisfaction in someone else's downfall, only in knowing that I had handled my own situation with integrity. The million-dollar idea had been mine, but the more valuable lesson was in how I'd responded to its theft with evidence, patience, and professionalism. Today, my consultancy is thriving. I've implemented transparent attribution policies for all innovations, ensuring every team member receives proper credit for their contributions. The betrayal that once dominated my thoughts now seems distant, a Painful but necessary lesson in protecting intellectual property and standing up for what's right. The email thread I forwarded to the CEO didn't just reclaim my algorithm, it reclaimed my professional agency. In the face of betrayal, I chose strategic response over emotional reaction. I documented everything, built an irrefutable case, and presented it professionally, not with a vengeful outburst, but with organized evidence that spoke for itself. Sometimes, the most powerful response to betrayal isn't an explosive confrontation, but a methodical unraveling of deception. While David was taking victory laps, I was building the case that would ultimately restore what was mine and reshape my future. The lesson wasn't just about intellectual property, it was about maintaining integrity when others abandoned theirs. In the end, the thread that revealed the truth wasn't just a collection of forwarded emails. It was the thread of principle that runs through every professional decision we make, every day, determining not just what we achieve, but how we achieve it. And that, more than any algorithm or innovation, is what defines a truly successful career. 6 months after my departure from Horizon Innovations, I was settling into my new reality in Portland. The royalties from my algorithm provided financial security, and my consulting business was steadily growing. I'd rented a modest office space in the Pearl District, hired 2 junior analysts, and was building a reputation for ethical business practices and technical excellence. But the past has a way of finding you, even when you think you've left it behind. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, a message from Thomas Parker, VP of Innovation at Vexel Technologies, one of Horizon's main competitors. Alex, I've been following your work with interest. Would appreciate the opportunity to discuss potential collaboration. Available for coffee this week? I'd never met Thomas, but Vexel was well respected in the industry. I replied with a polite acceptance and suggested a coffee shop near my office. 2 days later, I arrived early at the appointed location. Thomas was already there, a tall man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a careful smile. After brief introductions, he got straight to the point. I'll be direct, Alex. I know about what happened at Horizon, not the sanitized version in there. Press release, but the real story, how David Miller appropriated your algorithm and how you methodically built a case to reclaim it. He took a sip of his coffee. That combination of technical brilliance and professional integrity is rare. We'd like to bring you on as our Director of Predictive Technologies. I kept my expression neutral despite my surprise. How exactly do you know the details of what happened? Eleanor Winters joined our legal team last month. She was impressed with how you handled the situation. Thomas slid a folder across the table. Here's what we're offering. Salary, equity, team budget, and complete autonomy over your department's attribution protocols. We want innovation, but we want it done right. The offer was substantial, nearly double what I'd made at Horizon, plus significant equity, but something didn't feel right. I appreciate the offer, Thomas, but I've built something of my own now. Why would I walk away from that? Because we can scale your vision faster than you can independently, and because we have resources to develop your next big idea. He leaned forward. We also have information you might find valuable about David Miller. My interest was piqued, despite myself. What about him? After leaving Horizon, he approached us, tried to sell himself as the brilliant mind behind the predictive algorithm. When we expressed interest, he couldn't answer basic technical questions about the implementation. It was embarrassing. Thomas paused. Then he did something reckless. He offered to bring proprietary documentation of the algorithm. Documentation. We now know he stole from you before leaving Horizon. I felt a chill. Did he actually deliver anything? No, We declined his services, but it raised questions about what else he might have taken and who else he might have approached. The implications were clear. Despite my legal victory and compensation, David might still be trading on my work, potentially undermining both my reputation and my new business. I thanked Thomas for the information and promised to consider his offer, but my mind was already racing ahead to a different problem. Back at my office, I called Patricia Lynn, my attorney from the Horizon case. I need to know if my settlement agreement with Horizon prevents me from taking legal action directly against David Miller for continued IP theft, I explained after bringing her up to speed. It shouldn't, she replied after a moment's consideration. Your agreement with Horizon resolved their liability and established your ownership, but it doesn't preclude action against an individual continuing to misrepresent or misuse your property. I'd need to review the specific language again to be certain. Please do, and I want to know what evidence we'd need to establish that he's still claiming my work as his own or attempting to profit from it. That could be challenging, Patricia warned. Unless he's published something concrete or made documented claims to potential employers, it might be difficult to prove. Hearsay from Vexel won't be enough. I hung up feeling frustrated. If David was still leveraging my work to advance his career, I wanted it stopped, not out of vengeance, but because principles matter. Innovation thrives on proper attribution, an honest representation, but I needed more than second-hand reports. That evening, I received a text from Jessica. You won't believe who just connected with me on LinkedIn. Your old friend David wants to discuss opportunities at my new company. Jessica now worked as a lead developer at Cloudsphere, another Seattle tech firm. What did you tell him? I texted back. Nothing yet. Thought you might have some ideas. I considered the possibilities. This could be an opportunity to gather concrete evidence of David's continued misrepresentation, but I was wary of involving Jessica in potential legal complications. Be careful, I replied. He might be looking to claim credit for work that isn't his. Again. Jessica's response came quickly. I know, but I'm thinking, what if I played along just enough to see what he's claiming about his experience? Might be useful for you. It was tempting, but ethically questionable. I appreciate the offer, but I don't want you compromising your professional standards. Just be aware of his history. I'm having coffee with him tomorrow anyway, she wrote back. Don't worry, I can handle David Miller. I wasn't so sure. David had a talent for manipulation and self-promotion that had carried him far, despite his technical limitations. Still, Jessica was sharp and already aware of his methods. I tried to put it out of my mind and focus on my business. The next morning brought another surprise, an email from Rachel Garcia, still at Horizon's HR department. Alex, hope you're well. There's a situation developing that may concern you. David Miller is threatening legal action against Horizon, claiming wrongful termination and defamation. His lawyer has requested all documentation related to his dismissal, including your evidence. Our legal team is handling it, but I thought you should know. Nothing required from you at this stage. The news was concerning, but not entirely unexpected. David had always been strategic in his own way, watching which way the wind blew and adjusting his sails accordingly. If direct claims to my intellectual property weren't working, he might try to undermine the entire narrative of what had happened. At Horizon, I forwarded Rachel's email to Patricia with a brief note. Developments at Horizon. How might this affect me? Then I tried to focus on the client proposal I was developing, but my concentration was broken. My phone rang at 1:30. Jessica calling, hours earlier than I'd expected to hear from her after her coffee with David. Alex, you need to hear this. I'm sending you an audio file right now. I recorded my conversation with David. Oregon's a one-party consent state for recording, so it's legal. You recorded him? Jessica, that's... Just listen to it, trust me. She hung up. The audio file arrived moments later. I plugged in my headphones and pressed play. Jessica's voice came through first, casual and friendly, asking David about his new position and his time at Horizon. Then David's voice, smooth and confident. Between us, I actually developed the core algorithm they're using now, the one they're crediting to Alex Chen. A pause. Then, Alex was part of the implementation team, sure, but the conceptual breakthrough was mine. Horizon's management knows that, but they had to make a political decision after Alex made certain allegations. Jessica, sounding genuinely curious, but I thought there was documentation showing Alex developed it independently. David's laugh was dismissive. Documentation can be interpreted different ways. Look, I mentored Alex for years. We had countless whiteboard sessions where I outlined predictive approaches. He basically coded up my ideas, then claimed them as his own when he saw the potential value. It happens in tech all the time. The technical people thinking execution is the same as innovation. The conversation continued, with David becoming increasingly specific about his algorithm, describing features in a way that made it clear he still didn't fully understand the technical implementation. Then came the most damning part. I've actually got the original concept documents at home, my real notes, not the sanitized version Horizon has. I'm using them as the foundation for a next-generation system at my new company. Between us, it's going to make the Horizon implementation look primitive. I stopped the recording, my hands shaking slightly. This wasn't just continued misrepresentation. It was an explicit claim to have taken proprietary documentation and an intention to develop derivative work. I immediately called Patricia. I have evidence, I said when she answered. Clear, recorded evidence of ongoing intellectual property claims and potential theft of trade secrets. I'm sending it to you now. After listening to the recording, Patricia's assessment was direct. This changes everything. He's explicitly claiming to possess your intellectual property and intending to use it commercially. That's actionable, both civilly and potentially criminally, if he actually took confidential documents. What's our next step? First, secure this evidence properly. Second, we need to determine whether he actually has any documents or is simply bluffing. Third, decide whether you want to pursue this through Horizon's existing legal action or independently. I considered the options. I want to handle this directly. Horizon has their own battle with him, but this is about my intellectual property. In that case, we'll draft a cease and desist letter immediately, copying his new employer. Then we'll file for an emergency injunction to prevent any use of your intellectual property while we pursue the full case. The machinery of legal action spun into motion quickly. By the end of the week, David had been served with formal papers, and his new employer, a mid-sized analytics firm called Data Vertex, had been notified of potential intellectual property violations. I expected immediate blowback, but instead there was silence. No response from David, no acknowledgement from Data Vertex. The quiet was more unnerving than any confrontation would have been. 2 days later, I understood why. A link appeared in my inbox, an article from TechWire, a popular industry blog. Innovation dispute escalates. Miller claims systematic harassment following algorithm attribution. The piece quoted David extensively, portraying him as the victim of a vindictive campaign orchestrated by a former subordinate who couldn't accept the collaborative nature of corporate innovation. The algorithm in question was developed through countless team sessions that I led. David was quoted saying, "When credit was appropriately distributed to reflect the collaborative nature of the work, one team member became fixated on claiming sole ownership. Now I'm being targeted with legal threats for simply discussing my own professional experiences." The article mentioned neither my name nor Horizon specifically, but anyone familiar with the situation would know exactly what it referenced. More concerning was the subtle framing. David as the reasonable professional, me implicitly cast as the obsessive, vengeful engineer who couldn't share credit. It was a preemptive move to shape public perception. I forwarded the article to Patricia, who responded promptly, "Classic misdirection. He's trying to control the narrative by going public first. Don't respond to the article directly. That's what he wants. We'll let our legal filings speak for themselves." That evening, I received an unexpected call from Michael Thompson, still CEO at Horizon. "Alex, I've seen the TechWire piece. Just wanted you to know that Horizon stands by our determination regarding your intellectual property. Our legal team is preparing a formal statement clarifying the company's position. We won't allow revisionist history about what happened." I appreciated the support but remained focused on the immediate issue. "Thank you, Michael, but I'm more concerned about the documents David claims to have taken. If he has proprietary materials, that affects both my IP rights and Horizon's security. We're conducting a full audit of our systems to determine if anything was compromised," Michael assured me. "So far, we've found no evidence of unauthorized access or downloads after his termination, but we're looking back further now." After we hung up, I sat at my desk, thinking through the implications. If David was bluffing about having documents, that was one problem. Continued misrepresentation, but without physical evidence. If he actually had materials, that was far more serious. Either way, his public statement changed the dynamic. This was no longer a quiet legal proceeding, but a potential public relations battle. Jessica called late that night. "Alex, I'm sorry. I never thought he'd go public like this. I was just trying to help get evidence." "It's not your fault," I reassured her. "We needed to know what he was claiming. Now we do, and your recording gives us leverage he doesn't know about yet." The next day brought another development. An email from Thomas Parker at Vexel saw the TechWire article. "Our offer stands, with added legal support if needed. Sometimes the best defense is having institutional backing." I filed it away, without responding, still reluctant to abandon my independence despite the growing complications. Patricia arranged an emergency hearing for our injunction request, scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, David broke his silence with a direct email. "This has gone far enough, Alex. You got what you wanted at Horizon. Recognition, compensation, my termination. Continuing to pursue this vendetta will only damage both our reputations. I'm prepared to acknowledge your contributions to the collaborative process if you'll drop these baseless legal threats." The email was carefully worded. No explicit admission of wrongdoing, but a tacit acknowledgement that he needed this to go away. I forwarded it to Patricia without responding to David. "He's getting nervous," she observed. "The offer to acknowledge your contributions rather than your ownership is telling. He knows the recording exists, but doesn't know exactly what it contains. We should proceed with the hearing." The following Monday, I appeared in court alongside Patricia. David was represented by a corporate attorney from his new employer, suggesting they were standing behind him despite our notification. The judge reviewed our filings, including a transcript of Jessica's recording, and asked pointed questions about the nature of the intellectual property and the specific claims of document possession. David's attorney argued that his client's statements were hyperbolic shop talk rather than literal claims, that David was simply describing his general knowledge of the algorithm's development process, not claiming to have actual documents. When the judge asked directly whether David possessed any materials related to the algorithm, his attorney hesitated noticeably before answering, "My client has only his personal notes from his time leading the team that developed this technology." Patricia pounced on the statement. Your Honor, we have evidence establishing that Mr. Chen was the sole developer of this algorithm, working independently. Horizon Innovations has already acknowledged this fact formally. Mr. Miller's continued claim to have led development is itself a misrepresentation, and his assertion of possessing personal notes requires examination to ensure they don't contain proprietary information. The judge considered this, then turned to David's attorney. I'm granting a limited injunction prohibiting your client from making any commercial use of technology related to this algorithm pending full review. Additionally, I'm ordering preservation of all documents your client claims to possess related to this matter, with inspection by a court-appointed expert to determine if they contain proprietary information belonging to either Mr. Chen or Horizon Innovations. It was a partial victory, enough to prevent immediate harm while the case proceeded, but not the full validation I'd hoped for. As we left the courtroom, David caught my eye briefly. His expression wasn't angry or defiant as I might have expected, but something closer to resignation. 3 days later, the court-appointed expert submitted his report. David had provided a single notebook containing what appeared to be retrospectively created development notes, with dates that coincided with the algorithm's actual timeline, but content that was superficial and non-technical. The expert's assessment was unambiguous. These materials contain no substantive technical information about the algorithm's functioning. They appear to be general observations rather than development, documentation, and contain no proprietary information belonging to any party. In other words, David had been bluffing about having meaningful documentation. His original concept documents were fabricated after the fact, an attempt to create a paper trail that didn't previously exist. The revelation should have been reassuring. He couldn't misuse what he didn't have, but instead it left me feeling hollow. The extent of the deception, the calculated nature of it, was somehow worse than actual theft would have been. Patricia called with her assessment. This effectively ends the immediate legal threat. He has no proprietary materials to misuse, but his continued misrepresentation remains problematic for your professional reputation. We should consider next steps carefully. I took a long walk that evening, following the Willamette River as it curved through Portland, thinking about what I really wanted from this situation. The algorithm was secure. My compensation was established. My new business was growing. Was continuing this fight worth the energy and attention it would consume? When I returned to my apartment, I had an email waiting from Data Vertex's CEO, Anita Ramirez. Mr. Chen, in light of recent legal proceedings, we've conducted our own internal review of David Miller's claims regarding the predictive analytics algorithm. Based on our findings, we've terminated his employment effective immediately. While we make no admission regarding his prior statements, we want to assure you that Data Vertex will not develop or implement any technology based on the algorithm in question. We consider this matter closed and trust that you do as well. The message was clear. They'd cut David loose to distance themselves from the controversy. It was a business decision, not a moral judgment, but the effect was the same. David had lost his position, just as he'd lost his role at Horizon. His attempt to capitalize on my work had backfired for the second time. I forwarded the email to Patricia with a simple question. Is there any benefit to pursuing this further? Her response was measured. Legally, we've achieved the primary objective, preventing misuse of your intellectual property. We could pursue damages for attempted misappropriation and reputational harm, but that would require a lengthy process with uncertain outcomes. The question isn't just legal but personal. What resolution would actually satisfy you? It was the right question. I thought about it overnight, evaluating my true priorities against the cost, in time, energy, and focus, of continued legal action. By morning, I had my answer. I drafted an email to David directly. I've received notification of your termination from Data Vertex. I want to be clear about my position. I have no interest in preventing you from pursuing legitimate work in our industry. I do, however, expect complete cessation of any claims regarding my algorithm. To formalize this, I'm prepared to end legal proceedings if you sign an agreement acknowledging my sole authorship of the predictive analytics algorithm developed during 2021-2022 and committing to make no future claims to involvement in its development. This agreement would include no financial penalties for past actions, but would establish significant liquidated damages for any future violations. This offer remains open for 48 hours. I copied Patricia, who approved the approach. This gives him a path forward while protecting your interests. Smart compromise. David's response came within hours. A single line. Send the agreement. I'll sign. The formal acknowledgement was executed the following day. It contained no apology, no explanation for his actions, just the bare minimum required to satisfy my conditions. But it was enough. I had what mattered: clear documentation of my intellectual ownership and a binding commitment against future misrepresentation. With the legal issues resolved, I turned my full attention back to my consulting practice. The months of distraction had slowed our growth, but clients had remained loyal, appreciating our commitment to transparent practices and clear attribution. I hired 2 more analysts and expanded our office space, focusing on building something positive rather than continuing to fight old battles. 6 weeks later, Jessica called with news. David's left Seattle. Apparently, he's taken a position with a financial services firm in Chicago. Complete change of industry. Probably for the best, I replied. Fresh start somewhere. His reputation hasn't preceded him. You're being surprisingly generous, Jessica observed. After everything he did. I considered this. It's not generosity. I just don't want to carry this anymore. He made his choices, faced consequences, and now we're both moving forward. Different paths. And truly, I meant it. The anger that had initially fueled my methodical response to the theft had transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that maintaining the grudge served no purpose. I had reclaimed what was mine, established precedents for how intellectual property should be respected, and built systems to prevent similar situations in the future. The rest was just noise. 3 months later, Thomas Parker from Vexel reached out again, not with another job offer, but with a partnership proposal. We've been following your consultancy's work. There's potential synergy between your predictive models and our supply chain optimization systems. Would you consider a collaborative project with clearly defined attribution protocols for all parties? The proposal was intriguing. A chance to scale my work without sacrificing independence or principles. After careful review of the terms, which included explicit attribution requirements and creative ownership provisions, I agreed to a limited engagement. The project would serve as a test case for how independent innovators could collaborate with larger entities without being absorbed or exploited. Around the same time, I received an unexpected message from Michael Thompson. Horizon is revamping our innovation attribution systems. Your case was the catalyst. Would you consider consulting on the new framework? You have unique perspective that could benefit the process. It was an interesting proposition, helping to fix the system that had failed to protect my work initially. After some consideration, I accepted a limited advisory role. These developments reflected a shifting landscape in how intellectual property was viewed within the industry. The narrative around my case, now widely known through industry channels despite never being fully public, had prompted discussions about attribution, credit, and the ethics of innovation within corporate structures. Several tech publications ran pieces about the importance of proper documentation and recognition, though none mentioned my situation specifically. My consulting firm continued to grow, developing a reputation not just for technical excellence, but for ethical practices. We implemented attribution tracking systems that became industry standards, ensuring every team member received proper credit for their contributions. Clients appreciated the transparency, and potential employees were drawn to a culture that valued their intellectual contributions. A year after the final resolution with David, I received a LinkedIn message from a name I didn't recognize. Brandon Williams, identified as a software engineer at the financial services firm where David now worked. "You don't know me, but I wanted to thank you. The story of how you stood up for your work has become something of a legend among those of us who've dealt with similar situations. It gave me the courage to properly document and protect a security protocol I developed recently. Just wanted you to know your actions had wider impact than you might realize." I never responded to the message, unsure what to say, but it stayed with me. The idea that standing up for proper attribution hadn't just protected my own work, but had created ripples affecting others facing similar challenges. The algorithm itself had been valuable, certainly, but perhaps the greater contribution was establishing that principles matter, that documentation matters, and that the right approach to confronting injustice matters. Last week, I was invited to speak at a tech conference about innovation ethics and attribution in collaborative environments. Standing at the podium, looking out at a room full of engineers, developers, and corporate leaders, I thought about the journey from that Zoom call where I'd watched David presenting my work to this moment, addressing an industry finally taking these issues seriously. The true value of innovation isn't just in the code or concepts, I told the audience. It's in the integrity of the systems that acknowledge and protect creative contribution. When we build attribution into our processes as fundamentally as we build functionality into our products, we create environments where innovation thrives naturally because people know their work will be respected. After the talk, a young developer approached me. "That story about the algorithm that was stolen, then reclaimed, was that yours? People talk about it, but no one seems to know exactly what happened." I smiled slightly. "The specifics aren't important. What matters is that intellectual property was protected through proper documentation and professional process. That's the lesson worth carrying forward." And it was true. The details of my conflict with David had faded in importance, overshadowed by the principles the situation had illuminated. The email thread I had forwarded to the CEO had sparked changes far beyond my individual case. New corporate policies, industry discussions, and a greater awareness of how innovation should be properly attributed and protected. The million-dollar idea had been valuable, but the principles it had helped establish were priceless. In standing up for what was mine, I had inadvertently helped others stand up for what was theirs. That, more than any algorithm or paycheck, was the legacy worth preserving. 2 years after establishing my consulting firm in Portland, what began as a personal vindication had evolved into something much larger. Chen Analytics had grown to 15 employees, with offices in Portland and Seattle. Our client roster included mid-sized retailers across the Pacific Northwest, all benefiting from refined versions of my predictive algorithm. We'd developed a reputation not just for technical excellence, but for ethical business practices and transparent attribution policies. Every project we delivered included detailed documentation of who contributed what, from initial concept through implementation. It wasn't just about protecting intellectual property. It was about creating a culture where innovation thrived because people knew their work would be recognized. This approach attracted talented developers who had grown tired of corporate environments, where their contributions disappeared into the void of collective credit or, worse, were claimed by opportunistic managers. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I received a call from an unfamiliar number with a San Francisco area code. The voice on the other end belonged to Elise Nakamura, Chief Innovation Officer at RetailSphere, one of the largest retail technology companies in the country. Mr. Chen, I've been following your firm's work for some time. Your reputation for both technical innovation and ethical business practices has caught our attention. I'd like to discuss a potential acquisition. The offer took me by surprise. We weren't seeking acquisition, and I'd deliberately built the company to maintain independence. I appreciate your interest, Ms. Nakamura, but we're not currently looking to be acquired. I understand your hesitation, she replied smoothly, but I'd like to present our vision in person before you decide. What we're proposing isn't a traditional acquisition. It's more of a strategic partnership with resources. Your methodology would remain intact, including your attribution systems. In fact, that's partly why we're interested. Curiosity got the better of me. I can meet next week. But to be clear, I'm not making any commitments. Perfectly understood. My assistant will arrange the details. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair, considering the implications. RetailSphere had resources far beyond our reach. Global distribution channels, research facilities, hundreds of potential clients. But corporate acquisitions rarely maintained the culture of the acquired company, despite whatever promises were made during negotiations. I called Jessica, who had joined my firm 6 months earlier after growing disillusioned with her position at Cloudsphere. She now led our implementation team, ensuring that our algorithms were properly tailored to each client's needs. RetailSphere wants to acquire us, I said when she answered. Wow, that's significant. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's probably like most acquisition offers, lots of promises about autonomy that evaporate once the contracts are signed. Jessica was quiet for a moment. Maybe. But RetailSphere has a different reputation. Their last few acquisitions maintained their original leadership and approach. And their CEO, Vanessa Ortiz, has been outspoken about intellectual attribution in tech. Remember that keynote she gave at Tech Forum last year? I did remember. Ortiz had criticized the industry's casual approach to intellectual property, calling for more rigorous attribution standards, sentiments that aligned with our own practices. Still, I remained cautious. I agreed to hear them out next week. Want to join me? Absolutely. We should prepare a clear list of non-negotiables before the meeting. The following Monday, Elise Nakamura arrived at our Portland office with 2 colleagues, a financial officer and a legal counsel. I appreciated that she'd come to us rather than summoning us to their headquarters, a subtle acknowledgement of our independence. After introductions, Elise went straight to business. We've been watching your growth with interest, Mr. Chen. Your predictive analytics approach is impressive, but what truly distinguishes your firm is your methodology, particularly your attribution systems. We believe this represents the future of innovation management in technology. Those systems aren't just policies, I clarified. They're integral to how we work, how we think about development. Elise nodded. Precisely why we're interested. RetailSphere is undertaking a fundamental restructuring of our innovation pipelines. We want to implement similar attribution frameworks across our organization, but we recognize the value of bringing in a team that already embodies these principles rather than trying to reverse engineer them. The financial officer, Marcus Way, outlined their offer. substantially higher than the valuation I'd privately calculated for our firm, with additional performance incentives and retention packages for key staff. The terms included autonomous operation as a subsidiary rather than absorption into Retail Sphere's existing structure. We're essentially proposing to resource your vision, not redirect it, Elise explained. Your team remains intact, your methodologies become our standard, and you gain access to our global infrastructure and client base. The offer was compelling, but years in the industry had taught me to look beyond initial terms. What happens when our approaches conflict with established retail sphere practices? Who prevails in those situations? Elise didn't hesitate. That's outlined in Section 12 of our proposal. Your subsidiary would have contractual authority over attribution protocols and innovation documentation across the entire organization. We're not just acquiring your methods, we're adopting them as our corporate standard. The legal counsel, Diane Foster, added, "We've included specific protections against the scenario you're concerned about. The terms prevent Retail Sphere from diluting your attribution systems without explicit agreement from your leadership team." Jessica, who had been quietly taking notes, spoke up. "These provisions sound comprehensive. But what prompted this? Focus on attribution systems. Retail Sphere hasn't historically emphasized this aspect of development." It was a good question, one I should have asked myself. Elise's expression shifted slightly. "Two reasons. First, we've seen how your approach attracts top talent. Developers want to work where their contributions are recognized. Second, she paused. We recently had an internal situation involving disputed credit for a major innovation. It created significant problems, including the departure of key personnel and potential legal issues. Our board recognized the need for systematic change. The parallels to my own experience with David Miller were unmistakable. I wondered if Retail Sphere's internal situation had played out similarly, a manager claiming credit for someone else's innovation, but perhaps without the methodical documentation that had protected my work. "I appreciate your transparency," I said. "We'll need time to review the full proposal." "Of course, take 2 weeks, but I should mention that our CEO, Vanessa Ortiz, would like to meet with you personally before you make a final decision. She's very committed to this initiative." After they left, Jessica and I spent hours dissecting the proposal, identifying potential pitfalls and negotiation points. The terms were genuinely favorable, more autonomy than most acquisitions offered, with specific protections for our attribution systems and methodology. "It could work," Jessica admitted. "The financial terms are excellent, and the autonomy provisions have real teeth. Plus, imagine implementing these attribution systems at Retail Sphere's scale. Thousands of developers, hundreds of projects. That's the kind of systemic change you've been advocating for." She was right about the potential impact. What had begun as a personal response to intellectual theft could become an industry-wide standard if implemented across Retail Sphere's massive operation. Still, I had reservations. "Let's do more research before the meeting with Ortiz. I want to understand exactly what happened with their internal situation and how similar it might be to what we experienced with David." The following days were consumed with due diligence, reviewing Retail Sphere's public filings, speaking confidentially with industry contacts, examining their patent and innovation history. Nothing overtly concerning emerged, though we found hints about a disputed algorithm related to inventory optimization that had led to an undisclosed settlement with a former employee about 8 months earlier. 1 week later, I found myself in a private dining room at Portland's most exclusive restaurant, seated across from Vanessa Ortiz. She had a reputation as a formidable CEO, brilliant, demanding and transformational in her approach to technology. Retail Sphere had quadrupled in value during her 5-year tenure, largely through strategic acquisitions that somehow managed to maintain the innovative edge of the companies they absorbed. "Thank you for meeting me, Alex," she began, skipping the small talk. "I imagine you have questions beyond what Elise has already covered." "I do, primarily about the internal situation that prompted this focus on attribution systems. Understanding that context would help me gauge the authenticity of Retail Sphere's commitment." Ortiz nodded, seeming to appreciate the directness. "About 10 months ago, one of our senior directors presented a revolutionary inventory management algorithm to the executive team. We fast-tracked development, invested heavily in implementation, only to discover later that the core innovation came from a junior engineer who had been systematically excluded from credit. When she finally came forward with documentation, we faced a difficult situation: significant resources already committed, public announcements made crediting the wrong person, and a legitimate claim of intellectual theft within our organization. The scenario was painfully familiar. "How did you handle it?" "Not well initially," Ortiz admitted with surprising candor. "Our legal team's first instinct was to minimize exposure, settle quietly, perhaps with financial compensation, but no public correction. It was the standard corporate playbook." She paused. "I rejected that approach. We formally acknowledged the engineer's contribution, disciplined the director, and revised our public materials. But the damage was done. We lost the engineer to a competitor along with several colleagues who left in solidarity. It was a wake-up call about our innovation culture. And now you're looking to implement systematic protections rather than just handling incidents reactively," I observed. "Exactly. When our team identified your firm's approach to attribution, it resonated with what we're trying to build. You've created not just policies, but a culture where this type of appropriation is structurally difficult." She leaned forward slightly. "Alex, I know about your history at Horizon Innovations. Not all the details, but enough to understand that you've personally experienced similar issues. That perspective is invaluable." I was surprised by her knowledge of my background, though I shouldn't have been. Due diligence works both ways, and someone contemplating an 8-figure acquisition would naturally investigate thoroughly. "What exactly are you proposing beyond what's in the formal offer?" "I want you to lead our new Innovation Integrity Division, overseeing how attribution and credit are handled across all Retail Sphere operations. Your subsidiary continues as the development powerhouse it's becoming, but you personally take on this broader organizational role. It's an opportunity to institutionalize the principles you've been advocating, not just within your team, but across a company with global influence." The proposition was unexpected and compelling. While the acquisition offered resources and scale for our existing work, this additional role presented something more significant: the chance to transform how intellectual contribution was recognized throughout a major industry player. "I'll need to consider carefully," I said. "This goes beyond the original acquisition proposal." "Of course. But I want you to understand that this isn't just a business transaction for me. It's about fixing a fundamental flaw in how technology companies handle innovation attribution. Your experience, both the negative aspects at Horizon and the positive systems you've built since, makes you uniquely qualified to lead this change." As our meal concluded, Ortiz handed me a folder. Some additional thoughts on how the Innovation Integrity Division might function. Consider it a starting point for discussion. She stood to leave, then added, "One more thing, Alex. We recently hired someone you might know, Rachel Garcia, formerly of Horizon's HR department. She speaks very highly of how you handled your situation there. She's now leading our people operations team and would be a key ally in implementing these attribution systems. The mention of Rachel was unexpected, a connection to that difficult chapter at Horizon, now potentially becoming part of a new beginning. I left the dinner with much to consider. Back at my apartment, I reviewed the materials Ortiz had provided. The proposed Innovation Integrity Division was more substantial than I'd anticipated. A cross-functional unit with authority to establish attribution protocols, review disputed claims, and ensure proper credit across all retail sphere operations. The position would report directly to Ortiz, with significant autonomy and resources. I called Jessica to discuss the new developments. It's more than an acquisition now. Ortiz wants me to lead a division focused entirely on proper attribution of innovation across the company. And that's actually perfect for you, Jessica observed. It's like they designed a role specifically around your experience and values. Maybe too perfect, I replied, caution creeping into my assessment. I need to be sure this isn't just an elaborate recruitment strategy. Promise the moon to get us in the door, then gradually erode the autonomy once we're integrated. What does your gut tell you about Ortiz? Is she sincere? I considered the question carefully. Vanessa Ortiz had been straightforward about retail sphere's past failures, acknowledging institutional missteps rather than minimizing them. Her proposal for the Innovation Integrity Division showed real thought about structural solutions rather than superficial policies. And the connection to Rachel Garcia, someone who had witnessed my own struggle for proper attribution, suggested an authentic commitment to addressing these issues. I think she is sincere, I admitted, but even sincere leaders can be overruled by boards or market pressures. I need more concrete assurances before moving forward. Over the next 2 weeks, I engaged in detailed negotiations with Retail Sphere's team, focusing particularly on the structure and authority of the proposed Innovation Integrity Division. I insisted on specific contractual protections. The division's protocols would supersede conflicting corporate policies. Any attempt to disband or significantly alter the division would trigger acceleration of my equity vesting. And most importantly, the attribution systems we'd developed would be implemented company-wide as written, with modifications requiring explicit approval from me personally for the first 3 years. These were unusual demands in an acquisition context. But Ortiz supported them, even adding additional protections I hadn't considered. If we're not willing to contractually commit to these principles, then our stated commitment isn't meaningful, she told her legal team when they expressed concerns about the restrictions. As negotiations progressed, I arranged a private meeting with Rachel Garcia, now settled into her role at Retail Sphere. I was surprised to hear you'd left Horizon, I said when we met at a quiet cafe near Retail Sphere's Seattle office. The David Miller situation changed things for me, she explained. I saw how the initial institutional response was to minimize and contain rather than address the actual ethical breach. Even though Horizon eventually made the right decision, it highlighted systemic problems in how innovation is attributed and protected. She paused. When Retail Sphere approached me about building better systems from the ground up, it resonated with what I'd been thinking since your case. And Ortiz? Is her commitment to these principles genuine? Rachel considered the question. In my experience, yes. She's pushed for substantive changes, not just window dressing. The proposed Innovation Integrity Division has real authority in the current structure. I've seen the organizational charts and reporting lines, but more importantly, I've witnessed how she handles similar issues that have arisen since I joined. She consistently prioritizes proper attribution over expedience or politics. The conversation was reassuring. Rachel had been fair and thorough during my dispute at Horizon, and I valued her assessment of Retail Sphere's culture and Ortiz's leadership. As the acquisition terms neared finalization, I called a full company meeting at Chen Analytics. My 15 employees gathered in our main conference room, expressions ranging from curious to concerned. Though rumors about a potential acquisition had inevitably circulated, I'd been waiting for this moment to share the full details. Retailsphere has made an offer to acquire our company, I began, outlining the financial terms and operational structure. What makes this opportunity unique is their commitment to implementing our attribution systems across their entire organization. Additionally, I've been asked to lead a new division focused specifically on innovation integrity and proper credit for intellectual contributions. The reactions were mixed: excitement about the resources and reach Retailsphere could provide, concern about potential loss of the culture we'd built, questions about job security and reporting structures. I understand the apprehension, I acknowledged. Corporate acquisitions often promise autonomy that doesn't materialize. That's why I've negotiated specific protections for our team and methodology. I detailed the contractual guarantees, emphasizing that our attribution systems would become standard across Retailsphere's global operations. But ultimately, this isn't just my decision, I concluded. What we've built here belongs to all of us. I want your honest input before moving forward. The discussion that followed was thoughtful and substantive. Team members raised valid concerns and suggested additional protections we might request. By the end of the 3-hour meeting, a consensus had emerged. Proceeding with the acquisition made sense, provided the final agreement incorporated the additional safeguards the team had identified. 2 days later, I met with Elise Nakamura to present our collective response. We are prepared to move forward with these adjustments to the terms, I explained, presenting a document outlining the additional protections my team had requested. Increased retention packages for all employees, guaranteed continuation of our current projects, and specific language about maintaining our Portland office as an innovation hub. Elise reviewed the requests carefully. These are reasonable additions. I don't foresee any obstacles to incorporating them into the final agreement. 1 month later, the acquisition became official. Chen Analytics became a subsidiary of Retailsphere, with guaranteed operational autonomy and a mandate to implement our attribution systems across the parent company. I assumed dual roles, continuing to lead our team while establishing the new Innovation Integrity Division at the corporate level. The transition wasn't seamless. Despite contractual protections, integrating our approaches into Retailsphere's established processes required persistent advocacy and occasional confrontation. Some directors resisted the new attribution requirements, viewing them as unnecessary bureaucracy rather than essential protection for innovation. Others embraced the change, recognizing how proper credit motivated their teams and reduced conflict. 6 months into the integration, I faced my first significant test, a disputed attribution case involving a machine learning model developed for Retailsphere's European division. A senior architect had presented the model as his work, but a junior engineer produced documentation showing her original contributions had been incorporated without acknowledgement. The case landed on my desk as the first major issue for the Innovation Integrity Division to resolve. The parallels to my own experience with David Miller were striking, but this time I had institutional authority to address the situation directly. After thorough review of the evidence, including commit logs and design documents, the division issued a formal finding. The junior engineer had indeed developed the core algorithms, while the senior architect had made important but secondary contributions to implementation. Our recommendation mandated correction of all internal and external attribution, with both names included but primary credit given to the original innovator. The European division initially pushed back, arguing that changing attribution would undermine an already announced product launch. Vanessa Ortiz personally intervened, supporting our division's finding and making it clear that proper attribution took precedence over marketing convenience. We don't build long-term innovation culture by sacrificing integrity for short-term expediency, she wrote in a company-wide email announcing the corrected attribution. That case established the division's authority and sent a powerful message throughout retail sphere. Intellectual contribution would be protected regardless of organizational rank or political considerations. Over the following months, we handled dozens of similar cases while simultaneously developing preventative systems, documentation requirements, collaborative attribution frameworks, and transparent review processes that reduced the incidence of disputed credit. A year after the acquisition, Retail Sphere hosted its annual innovation conference, with over 2,000 developers and technologists attending from across the company's global operations. Vanessa Ortiz invited me to deliver the keynote address, focusing on the transformation in how the company handled attribution and intellectual contribution. Standing at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, engineers whose ideas would now be properly recognized, managers learning new ways to foster innovation without claiming it as their own, I felt a sense of completion. What had begun as a personal response to betrayal had evolved into a structural solution affecting thousands of developers and countless innovations. The strongest foundation for innovation isn't just technical infrastructure or research funding, I told the audience. It's the assurance that your contributions will be recognized, protected, and valued. At Retail Sphere, we're building systems where great ideas can flourish, because the people behind those ideas know they'll receive proper credit for their work. The response was overwhelming. Not polite professional applause, but genuine enthusiasm. From developers who had experienced the difference these systems made in their daily work. Later that evening, at the conference reception, a young engineer approached me with a familiar story. Her work appropriated by a manager, her protests ignored until our new attribution systems provided a framework for addressing the situation. "Your systems gave me a voice," she said simply. "Without them, I would have just been another junior engineer complaining about not getting credit, easy to dismiss or sideline. Instead, I had a structure that took my documentation seriously and evaluated it fairly." Her words stayed with me long after the conference ended. The email thread I had forwarded to Michael Thompson years ago hadn't just reclaimed my algorithm. It had set in motion a chain of events that now protected innovations I would never see and developers I would never meet. The million-dollar idea had been valuable, but the change it ultimately catalyzed was beyond price. That night, I received an unexpected email from David Miller, the first contact since our legal settlement years earlier. Saw the coverage of Retail Sphere's conference. "The attribution systems you've implemented are impressive. Different path than I would have chosen, but the results speak for themselves. Congratulations on your success." I read the message twice, surprised by both its existence and its tone. There was no explicit acknowledgement of past wrongdoing, no direct apology, but perhaps something more valuable. Recognition that my response to his betrayal had created something constructive and lasting. I considered various responses before, settling on simple acknowledgement. "Thank you for the message, David. I hope you're doing well in your current endeavors." It wasn't forgiveness exactly. The theft of my work and the calculated deception that followed weren't things I could simply dismiss. But it was a recognition that the story hadn't ended with our conflict. Something positive had emerged from that difficult chapter, structural protections that would prevent countless others from experiencing similar betrayals. The email thread I forwarded to the CEO had done more than expose a single instance of intellectual theft. It had ultimately created a model for how innovation could be properly attributed and protected, a model now being implemented across one of the industry's largest companies, affecting thousands of developers and potentially influencing standards. Throughout the tech sector, the algorithm had been worth millions, but its greatest value wasn't financial. It was in catalyzing a fundamental shift in how intellectual contribution was recognized and respected, not through grand statements of principle, but through methodical systems that made proper attribution an institutional standard rather than an individual battle. 18 months into my tenure at Retail Sphere, the Innovation Integrity Division had evolved from a theoretical concept into a core operational unit with 37 staff members and offices in Seattle, Singapore, and London. Our attribution systems had been implemented across the company's global operations, with measurable impacts on developer retention, innovation quality, and even recruitment. Retail Sphere was increasingly seen as a destination for engineers who valued proper recognition of their work. What had begun as a personal response to intellectual theft had expanded beyond my wildest expectations. Our team had reviewed over 200 attribution cases, established standardized documentation protocols for all new innovations, and created a transparent evaluation framework that made it significantly harder for managers to claim credit for their subordinates' work. More importantly, we'd shifted the cultural understanding of innovation within the company, from something that could be politically captured to something that was systematically protected. On a crisp autumn morning, I arrived at Retail Sphere's Seattle headquarters for a quarterly review meeting with Vanessa Ortiz. These sessions had become a regular opportunity to assess our progress and address emerging challenges. "The metrics are impressive," Vanessa observed, reviewing the data on my presentation. "Disputed attribution cases down 64% since implementation. Developer satisfaction with innovation recognition up 41%. Patent filings increased by 22%. She looked up from the slides. "The board is taking notice, Alex. These aren't just feel-good numbers. They're translating to tangible business outcomes." "Innovation thrives when properly attributed," I replied. "When engineers know their work will be recognized, they invest more deeply in developing breakthrough ideas." "Agreed, which is why I want to discuss expanding the scope of the Innovation Integrity Division." Vanessa pulled up a new slide deck. "We've been approached by TechCore about potentially licensing our attribution systems for implementation across their organization." TechCore was one of the largest technology conglomerates in the world, with over 100,000 employees globally. The prospect of our systems expanding to that scale was both exciting and daunting. "They've had several high-profile attribution disputes recently," Vanessa continued. "Their CEO reached out directly after seeing the presentation you gave at the Developer Summit last month. They're willing to pay significant licensing fees, but more importantly, this could establish our framework as an industry standard." The opportunity was compelling, but I had reservations. Our systems were designed specifically for Retail Sphere's organizational structure. Adapting them to a company with TechCore's size and complexity would require substantial modifications. Which is why they're proposing a 2-year implementation plan, with you personally overseeing the adaptation process. Vanessa slid a document across the table. "They're offering a dedicated team, executive sponsorship, and a compensation package. For your advisory role, that's substantial." I reviewed the proposal, impressed by both the financial terms and the apparent commitment to genuine implementation rather than superficial adoption. "I'd need to maintain my role here while consulting with TechCore. My primary responsibility remains to Retail Sphere." "That's absolutely." We see this as an opportunity to extend your work's impact while maintaining your leadership here. Think of it as creating a broader legacy for the systems you've developed. Legacy. The word resonated unexpectedly. When I'd first discovered David Miller presenting my algorithm as his own during that Zoom call years ago, I'd been focused solely on reclaiming what was rightfully mine. I couldn't have imagined that the methodical response I developed would eventually affect tens of thousands of engineers across multiple major companies. I'll need to review the full proposal and discuss the logistical challenges, but conceptually, I'm interested, I told Vanessa. Expanding these systems to TechCore could create meaningful change for a lot of developers. Excellent. Their executive team is planning a visit next month. We can arrange detailed discussions then. Vanessa closed the folder, then shifted to a different topic. There's something else we should discuss. The Innovation Awards Committee has selected you for this year's Transformation Impact Recognition. The ceremony is in December. The annual Innovation Awards were Retail Sphere's highest-profile internal event, celebrating exceptional contributions across the company. The Transformation Impact Award specifically recognized initiatives that fundamentally changed how the organization operated. I appreciate the recognition, but the attribution systems have been a team effort. The division's work should be acknowledged. Collectively, Vanessa nodded. The committee anticipated you might say that. The award is being given to the Innovation Integrity Division, with you as its founder and leader. Your entire team will be recognized. As I left Vanessa's office, I reflected on how far we'd come from that initial acquisition discussion 2 years earlier. The contractual protections I'd insisted upon had proven unnecessary. Retail Sphere had embraced our attribution systems more enthusiastically than I'd dared hope, with Vanessa herself becoming their strongest advocate within the executive team. Back in my office, I found Rachel Garcia waiting for me. As head of people operations, she'd been a crucial ally in implementing the attribution systems, particularly in incorporating them into performance reviews and promotion criteria. "Got a minute?" she asked. "There's a situation developing that needs your attention." "Of course. What's happening?" Rachel closed the door before continuing. "We've uncovered a potential pattern of attribution issues in the Singapore office. 3 separate cases in the past 2 months, all involving the same senior director, Alex Chen, no relation to you." "What's the pattern?" "Junior engineers develop promising algorithms or features, share them with Martin during review meetings, then find the work presented as team initiatives led by Martin in broader forums. The engineers have been reluctant to file formal complaints. Martin has significant influence over promotions and project assignments." The scenario was painfully familiar. A manager using structural power to appropriate others' work, creating precisely the environment we'd been working to eliminate. "Have you spoken with Martin directly?" "Not yet. Given his seniority and the potential sensitivity, I wanted to coordinate our approach. This will be the first real test of the attribution systems against a director-level employee with political capital. I considered the implications carefully. This was indeed a critical moment. How we handled this case would signal whether our systems truly applied equally across organizational hierarchies or whether power still trumped principle. "Let's proceed by the book," I decided. "Formal review through the Attribution Committee, with full documentation from all parties. No shortcuts or informal resolutions, regardless of Martin's position. I'll personally lead the review to ensure there's no perception of organizational pressure." Rachel nodded. "I anticipated that response. The review materials are being prepared now, but there's a complication. Martin has strong connections to several board members. He was instrumental in establishing our Singapore operations." The systems either apply to everyone or they're meaningless, I replied firmly. Vanessa has been clear about that from the beginning. I'll brief her before we proceed, but the process remains the same, regardless of Martin's connections. The following week, I flew to Singapore to conduct the attribution review in person. The 12-hour flight gave me time to thoroughly examine the documentation from the 3 engineers, each case showing a similar pattern. Innovative work shared during supervision meetings, followed by Martin presenting substantially the same work to leadership without acknowledging the original creators. His responses to preliminary inquiries had been dismissive, characterizing the concerns as misunderstandings about collaborative development. The Singapore office occupied 3 floors of a gleaming tower in the central business district. Martin Chen's corner office offered impressive views of Marina Bay, a visual reminder of his status within the organization. He greeted me with professional courtesy, though his body language suggested defensive preparation. I understand you've come personally to address these concerns, he began, gesturing for me to take a seat. I appreciate the attention, though I believe there's been a fundamental misinterpretation of our collaborative process here in Singapore. I'm here to conduct a standard attribution review based on documentation submitted through official channels, I clarified. The same process we'd follow for any attribution question, regardless of location or personnel involved. Martin's expression tightened slightly. Of course, though I must say, flying our attribution director halfway around the world for what amounts to a misunderstanding about team contribution seems excessive. Our systems are designed to thoroughly evaluate all attribution questions with consistency and fairness. Given the number of cases identified, personal interviews seemed appropriate. I kept my tone neutral, focusing on process rather than accusations. I'd like to start by reviewing your documentation of the development process for the inventory flow algorithm that was presented at the regional leadership meeting last month. Over the next 3 hours, I methodically worked through each case, comparing Martin's accounts with the documentation provided by the engineers and the objective evidence from development logs and meeting records. The pattern became increasingly clear. Martin had indeed been appropriating work without proper attribution, using his position to discourage objections and reframing individual contributions as vaguely collective efforts under his leadership. These commit logs show Alex Chen developing the core algorithm over 6 weeks in February and March, I noted, displaying the timestamps. Yet your presentation to leadership in April makes no mention of her contribution, instead referring repeatedly to my approach and my methodology. How do you reconcile these differences? Martin's dismissive wave betrayed growing frustration. Development is inherently collaborative in my department. I provide the conceptual framework, direction, and oversight. The implementation details may be executed by team members, but the intellectual architecture is mine. The documentation suggests otherwise, I replied calmly. Lian's original proposal predates any discussion with you, and her notes from your initial review meeting indicate you requested minor modifications rather than providing core concepts. These aren't implementation details, they're fundamental innovations. As the interview continued, Martin's responses grew increasingly defensive. He questioned the attribution system itself, suggested cultural differences in how contribution was understood in the Singapore office, and finally implied that the engineers were exaggerating their roles to advance their careers. With respect, Martin, the evidence is conclusive. In all 3 cases, substantial innovations were developed independently by engineers on your team, shared with you in supervisory contexts, then presented as your work without proper attribution. I closed my laptop, signaling the end of the review. My recommendation will be for formal correction of attribution in all company records, with primary credit given to the original developers. Martin's composure finally broke. This is absurd. I've been with RetailSphere for 12 years. These systems you've implemented might work in American offices, with American sensibilities, but they fail to recognize the nuances of development in different cultural contexts. I'll be discussing this directly with the board. The attribution. Systems apply consistently across all RetailSphere operations, regardless of location or seniority, I responded, maintaining professional calm despite his evident anger. The review findings will be submitted through standard channels, with opportunity for appeal through the established process. As I left Martin's office, I knew this case would test whether our systems could withstand political pressure from well-connected executives. If exceptions were made based on seniority or relationships, the entire framework would be undermined. Every developer in the organization would be watching how this situation unfolded. Back in my hotel room that evening, I drafted a detailed report documenting the findings and recommending specific attribution corrections. As I was completing the final section, a message arrived from Vanessa Ortiz. Martin Chen has contacted several board members directly about your review. Emergency Executive Committee call scheduled for tomorrow, 6 a.m. Singapore time. Please be available. The implications were clear. Martin was attempting to circumvent the formal process by leveraging his connections. This was precisely the scenario my contractual protections had anticipated, a test of whether corporate politics would ultimately trump attribution integrity. I joined the call early the next morning. Vanessa was there, along with the chief legal officer, the head of Asia-Pacific operations, and 2 board members with oversight responsibilities for international divisions. I've called this meeting to address concerns raised about the attribution review process in Singapore, Vanessa began. Martin Chen has made serious allegations about procedural overreach and cultural insensitivity in how the review was conducted. One of the board members, William Hayes, spoke up immediately. Martin has been instrumental in our Asian expansion. He's raised legitimate questions about whether our attribution systems account for regional differences in how innovation is managed. I'm concerned we're imposing Western frameworks without appropriate cultural adaptation. I waited for Vanessa's response, wondering if institutional pressure would lead to compromise. Her expression remained impassive as she replied, "The attribution systems were designed with input from all global divisions, including Singapore. They reflect universal principles about proper credit for innovation, not regional preferences about who gets to claim others' work." Her directness was reassuring. I provided a concise summary of the evidence, sharing key documentation that clearly established the pattern of appropriation. This isn't about cultural differences in management style. It's about specific innovations being claimed without proper attribution against company policy and basic principles of intellectual integrity. The head of Asia-Pacific operations, Michelle Tan, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "I've reviewed the evidence independently, and I have to agree with Alex's assessment. This isn't a cultural misunderstanding. Martin has systematically presented others' work as his own. The fact that he's well-connected shouldn't exempt him from the same standards we apply throughout the organization." William Hayes seemed taken aback by the unified front. "If the evidence is as clear as you suggest, then obviously appropriate. Action should be taken. I simply wanted to ensure we were considering all perspectives. The attribution review process is designed specifically to consider all perspectives through proper channels and based on documented evidence," I noted. Attempting to circumvent that process through personal connections to leadership is precisely what undermines innovation integrity. Vanessa concluded the meeting with characteristic decisiveness. The attribution review will proceed according to established protocols, without interference. Martin will receive the same fair process as any other employee, no more and no less. The findings will be implemented based on the evidence, regardless of his seniority or connections. After the call ended, Vanessa sent me a private message. This is why we created these systems, to ensure proper attribution isn't subject to power dynamics or political influence. Proceed exactly as you would in any other case. The following week, the formal findings were released. All 3 engineers were credited as primary innovators for their respective algorithms, with Martin acknowledged for supervisory contributions only. Additionally, Martin was required to complete specialized training on proper attribution practices and collaborative development documentation. His reaction was predictably negative. He submitted his resignation 2 days later, composing a lengthy email to the executive team characterizing the attribution systems as innovation bureaucracy that stifled the natural collaborative process. Several board members expressed concern about losing such a senior leader, but Vanessa stood firm in supporting the findings. The impact within the Singapore office was immediate and powerful. Engineers who had been hesitant to share innovations for fear of seeing them appropriated began bringing forward new ideas. Collaborative projects increased as trust in fair attribution grew. Within 3 months, patent filings from the Singapore team had increased by 40%. More significantly, word spread throughout the organization that the attribution systems applied equally to everyone, that even a powerful, connected director couldn't circumvent the processes designed to ensure proper credit. The message was clear. At Retail Sphere, innovation was protected regardless of who created it or who tried to claim it. The Alex Chen case became something of a turning point for the Innovation Integrity Division. What had previously been seen by some as an interesting but perhaps unnecessary layer of process was now recognized as essential protection for the company's innovative capacity. Requests for attribution reviews increased across all global offices, not because violations were more common, but because engineers now trusted the system to protect their contributions. 2 months later, I found myself in San Francisco, presenting our attribution frameworks to TechCore's executive leadership. The meeting had been scheduled before the Alex Chen situation emerged, but the successful resolution of that case had added weight to our approach. What impressed us most wasn't just the systems themselves, but how they were applied in the recent Singapore case. TechCore's CEO commented during the discussion, "Many companies have impressive-sounding policies that crumble when tested against political realities. Yours demonstrably don't." The licensing agreement was finalized the following month, a 2-year implementation plan that would gradually extend our attribution frameworks across TechCore's massive global operation. As part of the arrangement, I would split my time between Retail Sphere and TechCore, overseeing the adaptation of our systems to their organizational structure. At the Innovation Awards ceremony in December, the entire Innovation Integrity team stood on stage as Vanessa presented the Transformation Impact Award. Looking out at the audience, engineers, managers, executives, all affected in some way by the changes we'd implemented, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The true measure of innovation is not just what we create, but how we acknowledge those who create it, I said in my acceptance speech. When we protect the connection between innovators and their innovations, we don't just reward past contributions, we catalyze future breakthroughs. People innovate more boldly when they know their work will be recognized, valued, and protected. Later that evening, during the reception, a junior engineer from the Singapore office approached me. She was one of the 3 who had documented Martin's attribution violations. "I almost didn't submit my documentation," she admitted. I was convinced nothing would change, that someone at his level would be protected. When the findings were announced, everything changed in our office. People talk openly about their ideas now. They share innovations without fear. Her words crystallized what we'd accomplished, not just protecting specific innovations, but creating an environment where innovation itself could flourish because the people behind those innovations felt secure in their recognition. The conversation reminded me of my own journey, from the shock of seeing David Miller presenting my algorithm as his own, through the methodical process of reclaiming what was mine, to building systems that now protected thousands of engineers I would never meet. What had begun as a personal response to betrayal had evolved into structural protection for innovation at an institutional scale. The following week, I received an unexpected email from Michael Thompson, still CEO at Horizon Innovations. You've probably heard we're implementing new attribution systems at Horizon. Your work at Retail Sphere has become something of a gold standard in the industry. We'd like to discuss potentially consulting with us on our implementation. No hard feelings if you're not interested, but I thought it might represent a certain full-circle moment. The irony wasn't lost on me. The company where my work had been stolen was now seeking my expertise in preventing similar situations. After careful consideration, I agreed to a limited advisory role, not out of any lingering loyalty to Horizon, but because expanding these attribution systems to yet another major company would protect more innovators and their work. 6 months later, standing in Horizon's Seattle headquarters, a building I hadn't entered since my departure years earlier, I felt an odd sense of closure. The conference room where I was presenting our attribution frameworks was the same one where I had once sat across from Michael, Rachel, and Eleanor, presenting evidence of David's theft of my algorithm. The key principle is that attribution must be structural, not personal, I explained to Horizon's implementation team. It can't depend on individual integrity or good intentions. The systems must make proper attribution the path of least resistance, while making misappropriation difficult and transparent. After the presentation, Michael asked me to join him in his office, the same space where the final resolution of my case had been determined. It's not lost on me that we're implementing systems you created because of a failure that happened right here, he acknowledged. Sometimes progress comes from painful lessons. The important thing is that the lesson was learned, I replied, not just by Horizon, but increasingly across the industry. Indeed, your approach has become something of a movement. I've had conversations with 6 different CEOs about attribution systems in the past year alone. He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. I sometimes wonder if David Miller realizes what he inadvertently set in motion. His attempt to claim your algorithm ultimately led to systems that have made that kind of appropriation significantly harder throughout the tech sector. The observation struck me as profoundly true. David's theft, painful as it had been, had catalyzed something far larger than either of us could have anticipated. My methodical response, the documentation, the evidence gathering, the strategic approach, rather than emotional reaction, had created a template that now protected innovations across multiple major companies. The email thread I forwarded to you that day wasn't just about reclaiming my algorithm, I replied. Though I didn't realize it then, it was the beginning of something much more significant, a fundamental shift in how we protect the connection between innovators and their innovations. As I left Horizon's building that evening, I thought about the long, strange journey from that moment of discovery during a company-wide Zoom call to this present reality, where my approach to attribution had become an industry standard. The million-dollar idea that David had attempted to claim as his own had indeed been valuable, but its greatest value hadn't been financial. It had been in catalyzing a transformation in how intellectual contribution was recognized and protected. Throughout an entire industry, the betrayal had been painful, but the response had created something enduring. Attribution systems that would long outlast the specific algorithm that had prompted their creation. In that sense, David's theft had inadvertently led to his most significant contribution to technology, becoming the catalyst for systems designed specifically to prevent people like him from claiming credit for others' innovations. There was a certain poetic justice in that outcome, one that no legal settlement or financial compensation could have achieved. The very act that had sought to disconnect an innovation from its creator had ultimately strengthened that connection for countless developers across the industry. The million-dollar idea had sparked a billion-dollar transformation in how innovation itself was protected. 5 years after that fateful Zoom call where I first saw David Miller presenting my algorithm as his own, I found myself addressing the World Innovation Forum in Geneva, a gathering of technology leaders, policy experts, and academic researchers focused on the future of innovation protection. The journey from individual betrayal to systemic transformation had been remarkable, even to me. The greatest threat to innovation isn't lack of funding or technical limitations, I told the audience of 3,000 attendees. It's the disconnection of innovations from their creators. When we fail to protect that essential link, we don't just harm individual innovators, we undermine the very foundations of collaborative creation. The attribution systems that had begun at retail sphere had expanded beyond anything I could have imagined. 14 major technology companies had now implemented variations of our framework, covering over 300,000 developers worldwide. The approach had become known in industry circles as the Chen Protocol, a designation that still felt surreal whenever I heard it. After my keynote, I was approached by Sofia Menendez, the newly appointed U.S. Patent Commissioner. "Your work has sparked important conversations at the policy level," she said. "We're exploring how attribution systems like yours might inform reforms to intellectual property protection for employed inventors. Would you be willing to consult with our working group?" The request highlighted how far the impact had spread, from a personal reclamation of stolen work to potential changes in national innovation policy. I agreed to participate, recognizing another opportunity to strengthen the connection between creators and their creations at a structural level. Later that evening, during the conference reception, I encountered a familiar face, David Miller himself, now working for a mid-sized European technology firm. It was our first face-to-face meeting since the resolution of our conflict years earlier. The moment was bound to happen eventually, given our overlapping professional circles, but the timing still caught me off guard. "Alex," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Impressive keynote." "Thank you," I replied, maintaining professional composure despite the unexpected encounter. "I didn't realize you were attending the forum." "My company sent several representatives. I've been following the expansion of your attribution systems." He hesitated, seemingly choosing his words carefully. "They've changed the landscape significantly." The conversation might have ended there, a brief, awkward exchange between former adversaries, but David surprised me by continuing. "I've spent years watching what you built from our conflict," he said, his expression difficult to read. "It would have been easier if you'd just been vindictive, filed a lawsuit, demanded compensation, moved on. Instead, you created something that fundamentally changed how innovation is protected. That's a different kind of response than most would have chosen." It wasn't quite an apology, more an acknowledgement of the unexpected consequences of his actions. Still, it represented a level of reflection I hadn't anticipated. "The systems weren't built from vindictiveness," I replied. "They were built from the recognition that what happened to me was happening to countless others without the documentation or position to protect themselves." The goal was never punishment, but prevention. David nodded slowly. Well, you've certainly achieved that. My current company implemented your protocols last year. Every innovation is documented from conception through development, with clear attribution trails. The systems make it virtually impossible to do what I did. He gave a wry smile. I imagine there's some satisfaction in that. The satisfaction isn't in preventing specific behaviors, I corrected him. It's in creating environments where innovation thrives because people know their contributions will be recognized. That benefits everyone, companies, developers, and ultimately users who receive better products because of it. Our conversation was interrupted by another conference attendee seeking to discuss my keynote, ending the unexpected encounter with David. As he walked away, I reflected on the strange path that had led us both to this moment. How his attempt to claim my algorithm had inadvertently catalyzed protections that now made such appropriation systematically difficult across the industry. Later that night in my hotel room, I received an email from Jessica, still a key leader in what had evolved into the Attribution Systems division at RetailSphere. Saw your keynote live stream. Remember when this was just about getting back your algorithm? Now look at what you've built. Your response to betrayal created protection for hundreds of thousands of innovators who'll never know your name but benefit from your systems every day. Her observation captured something essential about the journey. What had begun as a personal response to intellectual theft had transcended individual circumstances to become structural protection at an industry scale. The email thread I had, forwarded to Michael Thompson years ago, carefully documenting the theft of my work, had been the first link in a chain that now extended far beyond anything I could have envisioned. The Innovation Protection Working Group that Commissioner Menendez had mentioned became a significant part of my work over the following year. Our recommendations were incorporated into proposed legislation, creating stronger protection for employed inventors and establishing clearer standards for attribution in collaborative environments. The Chen protocols were cited specifically as a model for how technical documentation could strengthen the connection between innovators and their innovations. At RetailSphere, our attribution systems continued to evolve, incorporating machine learning components that could detect potential attribution issues before they became problematic. The technology identified unusual patterns in how innovations were documented and presented, flagging potential disconnections between developers and their work for human review. The most meaningful outcome, however, emerged in the stories I heard from engineers across the industry, how attribution protection had transformed their experience of innovation. A developer in Bangalore described finally receiving recognition for an algorithm that would previously have been absorbed into a manager's presentation. A team in Toronto explained how clear attribution had enabled better collaboration by removing the fear that sharing ideas meant losing credit for them. These stories validated what I had believed from the beginning. Protecting the connection between innovations and their creators didn't just serve individual interests, it strengthened the entire innovation ecosystem. People innovate more boldly when they know their contributions will be recognized and valued. During a leadership retreat at RetailSphere's Mountain Campus in Colorado, Vanessa Ortiz and I found ourselves reflecting on the unexpected journey our partnership had taken. When we first approached you about acquisition, I never imagined we'd end up fundamentally reshaping how innovation is attributed across the industry, she admitted. We were just trying to fix an internal problem with your expertise. And I was just trying to protect my team and our approach, I replied. Neither of us saw the full potential of what we were building. That's how the best transformations happen, Vanessa observed. They start with solving a specific problem the right way, then expand as others recognize the value of the solution. Your response to what happened at Horizon could have been purely personal. Reclaim your algorithm, get compensation, move on. Instead, you built something that protects innovations far beyond your own. She was right. The million-dollar idea that David had attempted to claim had indeed been valuable, but its greatest value hadn't been financial or even technical. It had been in catalyzing a transformation in how intellectual contribution was recognized and protected throughout an entire industry. The betrayal had been painful, but the response had created something enduring, attribution systems that would long outlast the specific algorithm that had prompted their creation. In that sense, David's theft had inadvertently led to his most significant contribution to technology, becoming the catalyst for systems designed specifically to prevent what he had done. There was a certain elegant justice in that outcome, one that no legal settlement or financial compensation could have achieved. The very act that had sought to disconnect an innovation from its creator had ultimately strengthened that connection. For countless creators across the industry, as I stood on the mountain overlook, watching the sunset paint the Colorado peaks in gold and crimson, I felt a profound sense of completion. The email thread I had forwarded to the CEO hadn't just reclaimed my algorithm. It had sparked a movement that now protected innovations I would never see from creators I would never meet. That was a legacy worth building, one that transformed betrayal into protection, not just for me, but for all who would innovate after me. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.